I'm John Kaplan, along with co-host and co-organizer Ken Martin. We're really pleased to have you here for, I guess you could call it Gillette Fest 2016. The younger kids might call it Rodapalooza. The ones that follow football could call it RG1, instead of RG3. So we're glad you're here. It's our pleasure to be here, and especially, as you can tell, a great group here to honor a very special person, Rod Gillett, as he approaches a milestone 90th birthday, which is why Kent and I thought it would be a wonderful opportunity to get together and really let Rod know how much he's meant not only to Kent and to myself, but to all of you and many, many other people, some of whom you will hear from in just a few minutes. But first, I want to turn it over to Kent, who has a few words, and we have some fun surprises coming your way, Rod, and I think everybody's going to have a really good time.
You have no idea how nervous I am, having read this and rewritten it and edited just 5 minutes ago again, for the umpteenth time, in front of the man who edited so much of my copy and whose critiques are still emblazoned in my memory. It's a daunting task, let's just put it that way. So, how can I sum up in just a few brief, and as Rod might say, pithy comments, a life well lived and a career well served? Now, maybe Rod won't agree with that assessment. For more than 4 decades, he counseled, tutored, mentored, guided hundreds and hundreds of students who walked into his newsroom. I venture to suggest virtually all of them wondered whether broadcast journalism was right for them. And probably when they graduated, most of them on time, more than a few probably still wondered if they could survive a career in the news business. But I guarantee you this, every one of them learned how to write a little bit better and how to view the world with a little more critical eye and a much more informed eye, thanks to Rod and his instruction. What do we remember? Of course, the basic principles of good, solid journalism. Why integrity in your work and respect for the profession and for other people matters. And how to interview somebody, anybody, anyone about anything, and then write a good, concise, clear, straightforward story that left the listener better informed than before. Who taught us that? That would be Rod. And personally, who else would call me out on a rare day off? I was at home, and informed me about a gas main explosion in Centralia, telling me he needed me to get up there and manage the coverage for KBIA. And who, when I replied, well, I was kind of stuck because my car was in the shop that day, so maybe somebody else could help out. Rod only paused briefly and then grumbled, well, get it down off the rack and get up there. Yeah, that would be Rod. But you know what? You know what that told me? You know what that showed me? That's one of the great lessons that Rod taught me about journalism. Get over yourself. There's a story to be covered. The story is what's important. You can't get there because you don't have a car? Figure it out, which I did. The mechanic was just finishing up when I got up to the dealership. People need to know about a story. Figure it out. Do your job. One of the many lessons he taught me, as he taught my classmates and scores of journalism students all through the decades. Rod probably thought many graduates might have forgotten about him. After all, college, and especially the journalism school, can be a blur when they finally stumbled across the stage, grabbed their diploma, and made their way into the rest of their lives. College quickly faded into the rearview mirror. I think we can all admit to that. That happens. Heck, we were lucky to remember any of the basic points of AP style, broadcast style, how to construct a simple sentence and active voice. So yeah, Rod could be forgiven if he believed that he too might have faded into that rearview mirror of life and only heard from a few students as the years passed on, outside of an occasional Christmas card, maybe an email, and maybe occasionally, if we got a chance to come through here, coffee, maybe a beer. But again, if Rod thought that, Rod would be wrong. Testament to this notion is the fact that we stand here today because of Rod, who, yes, is remembered, and remembered very fondly by so many of his students. So yeah, Rod, to quote a certain wingless angel, you really had a wonderful life. And we thank you, Rod, for making my life better, for letting me be a friend, and for making me and all of us better journalists. Now, about that grade you gave me in 101, can we talk about that a little bit later? Thank you very much.
Rod, I don't think there's much more I can add to the eloquence of Kent Martin, except to say something that everyone in this room knows, and hopefully you do too. Rod Gelatt is journalism for Mid-Missouri. For decades, he came into our home via television or radio to tell us our news, all the while that he was working as one of the top professors at the world's top journalism school.
So in 1969, as a student here, we were all assigned light meters to match up with the film cameras. Set the light meter, adjust the camera. And we had to go out to Channel 8 to be assigned this light meter, now done by electronics inside the camera, but it was a separate light meter. So I drive out there in my manual transmission car. My best girlfriend ever was in the seat next to me. And we get out to Channel 8, and rather than being greeted like, "Oh, welcome, good to see you, I got your light meter for you," it's, "I've been waiting for you." That's what first words as I walked in. And then the kindly curmudgeon says, "Do you hear the police scanners? There's a big fire." So he gives me a camera. Remember, some of you will remember the cameras that wind up. Film cameras, not videotape or something else. Film cameras that you wind up. And he shoved me this camera and said, "Do you remember how to use the light meter like we talked about in class?" And I lied to him and said, "Yes." And then I headed out the door, very proud. This was my first TV assignment. We go down 63, old 63, we turn left on a county blacktop, we turn right on a county dirt road, and finally get to the fire. Most of you know what a grass fire looks like. It's a thin line, sort of nice and wavy. The flame is like about this tall off the ground, okay, just burning along. There are no structures, there are no trees, there are no cows in the way. It's just that nice, long, wavy line. And I shoot the hell out of it. I mean, I'm winding up that camera and shooting, and I shoot it all, and I come bounding back to the car. B and I drive back to the station, and I walk into, my chest is thumping, okay, I have my first TV news story. And Rod looks at that camera and looks over. He doesn't look at my face. First thing he looks at is that footage meter on the camera. Did you shoot 100 feet of film? What was it? The Chicago fire? So, a colleague, and for me, an employer, and an instructor on how to be a teacher, and now a longtime friend. We are very proud of you. We are proud to know you. And we are proud of all those various relationships we've had with you over the years. So the school decided, the department decided, that one of the ways we could recognize this kindly curmudgeon is with this, which will be on display now at KBIA. Yes. So here he is in his two best newsrooms, KOMU and KBIA, being the kindly curmudgeon that has been teacher and friend to so many of us for so long. We're proud to know you, sir, and it's been a great, long relationship for all of us in this room. I wish you'd buy lunch sometimes. I always end up with a check, it seems, but you know, it's a great relationship. Thank you, Rod. This will hang inside the KBIA newsroom.
So relieved to see what's under
In
there.
perpetuity.
I'm his oldest son. I have a couple stories. Dad was always trying to get Tom and I to go into journalism. He's always trying to get us to go to Mizzou also. He failed on both counts. But it didn't mean that he didn't sort of, even when we were off in school, try and influence us. So I was probably the only kid in my dorm room whose letters from home were typed, double-spaced, on yellow paper. That at the bottom of the page it would say, "Love, Dad," but then he would put -30 dash on it, just in case I didn't know that they were all over. Now, in true Gelatt fashion, I would also type my letters. Mine weren't on a royal manual like his, whereas I at least had an electric typewriter, and send them home. Then the next letter would come. But it would not only include his return letter, it would include the letter I had sent, edited for grammar, punctuation, and style. Tom's nodding his head. I think so. And for this time, I just have to tell one other story. You've heard about Missouri Forum.
Award-winning.
Award-winning, yes. Award-winning Missouri Forum. As some of you know, Dad has a personalized license plate that says J-Prof. He's had it for about 30 years. That wasn't his first choice for personalized plates. Tom knows the story. So one day he was, I think we were in college then. We were home for there. We're sitting at the dinner table, and Dad comes, and Missouri had just started the personalized plates program, and said, "Oh, your mom and I are going to get personalized license plate." And Mom had chosen hers. It's, I think, AMG OTR. She's an occupational therapist. He goes, "And I'm going to do mine. I'm going to promote Missouri Forum. So my license plate's going to say MOFO." And that's what he called it. Yeah, so I just remember Tom and I are looking at each other, and after the shock wear off, we're sort of barely holding it together. And I've got running through my mind, I said, this is probably not going to make it through the review process at the DMV. But just say it gets to the production phase, and some poor inmate is at the state pen is looking at this newly minted plate and thinking, what badass dude is going to be driving around town as the mofo of Central Missouri? So, needless to say, we finally decided we needed to let him in and convince him to put something else on the plate. Anyway, I'll turn it over to Tom, but congratulations, Dad. Happy birthday.
I don't, well, I saw the agenda that there was only 5 minutes, and so I didn't prepare anything, but of course there's plenty of stories, as you can imagine. I'm Tom, I'm the second son, by the way. But a couple come to mind. The first, when Mark was talking about the letters, which the story is very true, by the way, and with red ink, they would come back. Or even his letters would be corrected in red ink too. If you didn't want to retype it, you go back and correct it all. And but I also remember, I don't know, it was about the time when I think Dad was at KBIA, but we were still receiving 3 newspapers a day in the house. I think we got both of the Columbia papers and the St. Louis paper. And the evening sort of period for Dad, I know that everyone knows how critical he was. He also tried to be at home, but he would tend to mesh the two sometimes. And so his evening sort of time was to sit in his lazy boy, and he has the 3 newspapers laid out, one on his lap and 2 here as he's going through all 3. He's got Channel 8 News on the TV, and he's got the ear thing listening to KBIA. And everything was going on, and everything was being absorbed, and we were running around doing whatever. And then every once in a while, you'd hear this, bam, and the ear thing comes off, the papers go off, and he runs to the phone, and he says, "You've got dead air." And then he'd go back to the chair and plug it back in. That was that. And I heard that more than once, so I learned at a young age exactly what dead air really was. I didn't know. The other story that comes to mind is that, as Mark said, I think he would have preferred we went into journalism. We went pretty far from it. But I did, when I was in college in Montana, to earn a few bucks, I did agree to read the news at the local campus radio station. And so I came home at Christmas break, and I told my dad that I was making a few bucks reading the news. Really? Tell me about it. And I said, well, I go into the little station, and they had the teletype machine there or whatever, and I said, and I take it off, and I sit down, and I read it. And he looks at me, and he looks over my mom, and he says, my son is a ripping reader. So anyway, I'll leave it there. There's more than those, I'm not sure, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
All right, well, we have to certainly hear from, they say that behind every great man, there's probably a great woman saying, wrap it up. So we want to have Andy say a few words. Probably no one knows Rod better, I would think.
No. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you to those who put this day together, to John and Liz, and to Kent and Kent, to Martha, who've worked so hard to bring this group together to honor Rod. It's really a heartwarming event, and I thank you so much. To me, the greatest thanks that can be given to a teacher is to know that he or she has made a difference in the life of his students in some way, has left a lasting imprint. And I think this gathering shows, and the wonderful videos show that Rod has done that. And having lived with him for so many years, I know how hard he worked to do his job, and how important it was, and how important his students have been to him and continue to be. The one little anecdote I will bring up is that when Rod worked with his students, he used to give current events tests to them. And he would bring those tests home ahead of time, and we would be at the dinner table, and he would quiz Mark and Tom and me on the questions to see how we would do. And actually, sometimes we did better than the students did. So thank you again for coming and for participating in this great day.
All right, well, some of us have come from near and far for the man of the hour, so we certainly have to have some words of wisdom, short and pithy, I believe, as Kent would say, from Mr. Rod himself. So, Rod, we welcome you to say a few words. You can stay there.
No.
Okay.
I need the dais.
Okay.
What kind of operation do you think this is?
Let's have some place to put my ad-libs.
There you go. Ba-dum-bum. And let me second what Andy has said while Rod comes up here. Thank you so much to not only co-organizer and friend and former TA Ken Martin. Thank you, Ken Collins. Thank you, Shannon Burke-Kransberg, for all the wonderful work you did, and Martha Pickens for all the work you did. You know, these things are more than just one person. You know, it really takes a team to make it happen, but it's all for a wonderful cause, for a man we love and a school we love. So without further ado.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you all for all those kind remarks that you have blessed me with. Thanks to everybody for coming on this memorable occasion. I've never had a 90th birthday before, so I have nothing for comparison purposes. I do get some encouragement in this aging process, knowing I had several ancestors who lived beyond 100 years. They're all buried in the Gelatt Cemetery in the little village of Gelatt, Pennsylvania. I had the opportunity to walk among them about 20 years ago. The fact they survived the more primitive lifestyle of their period does give me some encouragement that we might be able to try this again. So far as I know, none of them ever was a journalist. And by the way, for those of you who question, was there really a place called Gelatt, Pennsylvania? There is. It's near Scranton in Susquehanna County, up in the northeast part of the state. You'll find it on a very, very detailed map. I've been there. I've not been to the other one, Gelatt, California, although son Tom says he looked it up on the internet somewhere near the Nevada border. Both places were settled by and, of course, named after my distant ancestors. Well, by my count, I've now typed about 20 lines of copy of these ad lib remarks, so that, as you will recall, this is a little bit more than a minute of airtime on reading aloud. And I know I have left you absolutely breathless and astounded at the ancestral and geographic information. It's kind of like a modern-day television news broadcast. A lot of words, but of absolutely no future value. So, where do we go from here? Well, because of the rather diverse nature of this audience, to use a term popular in academic circles these days, I hesitate to focus entirely on journalism of the good old days and commiserate on its passing. Nor should I spend a lot of time reminiscing about the family, because you're going to hear enough of that this weekend as they go through our archives in our basement looking for stuff they're going to take home as we continue to try to downsize. Don't worry, you'll get more chocolate mint ice cream after this. Speaking of downsizing, and for sitting through this, excuse me, if any of you would like a Marantz cassette recorder, we uncovered one the other day in the basement, and it's available. Just come by the house, and it's free, no charge. The downsizing includes going through many boxes of extraneous information that I brought home from the journalism school and from the two newsrooms here. And in the process of going through those files, I've run across several items I want to share with some interest and share with you. There was a report in July 1993 listing the average starting salaries of bachelor's degree graduates in certain career fields. Journalism was 8th on the list at $19,900 a year. There was a footnote pointing out that included those going into advertising and public relations, which kind of skewed the average for the grunt reporters and producers. 2 years later, 1995, the average weekly salary for new undergrads going into radio news was $327 a week, and only $346 for those going into TV news. 79% of the graduates were employed within 6 to 8 months after graduation. By then, women had become the majority of TV news anchors and reporters. A third of the assistant news directors, just 17% of the TV news directors. But turning to less somber news, my files search turned up an article from 1993 about how TV reporters should outfit themselves according to the elements in which they operate. To quote, "You've seen the brave TV troops out there in the rain and the sleet, exhaling steam and cliches as the word live appears on the screen. They're out there on the front lines, risking life and limb to bring us the news without which we would not be the best informed people in the world. And so they wear combat clothes, the trench coat, that British tradition that rose from the muck and mire of the First World War. Put a TV reporter in a trench coat with the rain streaming down his or her visage, and you can truthfully say, yes, there are heroes in our time." But the article points out Most of them don't wear the right trench coat. I won't go into the various trade names, but the author's advice is never to wear a brand new trench coat on camera. It must, he says, look worn, as though it had survived the Second Battle of the Marne. And it should have interesting spots that suggest bloodstains. To achieve that look, we're advised, hire a homeless person to wear it for a while. Speaking of what to wear, I had saved from years ago a flyer advertising the Cam Jack. Some of you maybe not remember that. It appears to be a rather normal vest with lots of pockets in which to stuff your stuff. It has a flap that identifies you as a news person, although if you're walking around with a bulky camera on your shoulder, that might be a giveaway. It's armored in 3 ballistic levels. Comes in sizes from small to double extra large and in 4 available colors. It's what you need for covering riots or city council meetings. I didn't want to get you all excited about one of these and have you try to go online to buy one and then find that they've gone out of business. So I checked online, and sure enough, they're still making them. They're no longer called the Cam Jack. They have some other word for them now, but they do come in several additional colors now. I mean, if any of you is really interested, I can give you the address and the phone number. And finally, the word we all love to hear, right? Something from the typewriter of Charles Osgood, my all-time hero of news by poetry. He wrote this for those of us in the news who always had to fight the front office about budgets. I quote, "We who are in radio and television too, though justly proud of who we are and what we do, know the world is swiftly changing in the drama that we tell, and while we want to feel we have cause for standing tall, this great broadcast business is a business, after all. We all have certain pressures, and we all have to report to a boss, a general manager, or someone of that sort, who tries to see that we, who have their confidence and trust, don't spend a nickel more than we absolutely must. One day you'll slip this mortal coil, and let's hope that on that date, when you leave it all behind and you stand before the gate, that it can't be said of you where the bright angel will have flown you, that the world was just a bit less well-informed for having known you." Thank you to Charles Osgood. They told me I had about 3 minutes to talk, but when I'm constrained, I tend to balk. Of course, without a limit, I sort of ramble and cause you toward the door to scramble. Forgive me, incidentally, for having used a script. It's much less dangerous that way. I am less likely to slip. Unlike a certain candidate for president this year, I find that if I write it down, I have much less to fear. My intent was to do just a little speeching, so forgive me for my endless preaching. But after about 40 years of teaching, I am guilty at times of overreaching. It used to be we had 50 minutes per classroom session in which to try to get across a lesson, having to do perhaps with writing tightly or about events that were unsightly. We strained at times to be unpassive while struggling instead for verbs most active. The leads we taught should be compelling, lest the viewers find them somewhat repelling. Frame the subject, use a backlight. And remember this about a soundbite. Look for quotes that tell the story, that sum it up in all its glory. Seek out sources who know the facts and will not be the least bit lax in telling you all you want to ask, because that is, after all, your task. We taught you how to write a script and later how to read it. And then the teleprompter. And boy, some of you sure need it. Another rule we always made clear is to remember, my friends, write for the ear and seek out sound for audio ambiance. With luck, it may help hold your audience long enough to keep their attention until the next commercial. Or did I mention, this is a business, don't forget it. Don't let it slip your mind lest you have to join the hunt for a job of another kind. There's much, much more we should have taught if we all had had more time, but this seems such a perfect way to finally end this rhyme. A few moments ago, I uttered the word finally, and you interpreted that to mean I was winding down. Well, almost. First, I have to pass along a couple of other items from the past. For a time in one of my television classes, I assigned all the students to monitor a 6 or a 10 o'clock newscast, a station of their choice, paying particular attention to the content, but also the story placement, anchor mannerisms, etc., etc. One young man, and remember this was many years ago, chose our opposition at that time, Channel 13 in Jeff City, which at that time featured a woman anchor at 10 o'clock. Obviously, this was quite upsetting to the student who wrote in his monitoring report, "I resent the fact that a woman is an announcer for a television news broadcast. This particular female doesn't come across very well. Her delivery is full of hesitation and bad enunciation. I feel the fact that a woman is being presented makes me amplify her mistakes." Many times the newscasters make a story sound more dramatic than it actually is. Really? They also carry this to the other extreme by resorting to puns in a story lead-in. Like the newscaster on this particular station who led into a story about a holdup at a bakery where the owner was shot. He said, "Well, here's a murderer that takes the cake." The student had the sense to write that this was in bad taste. He obviously also didn't know the definition of a pun. Okay, I am winding down. At the outset, I thanked you all for coming. I repeat that. I also want to recognize, of course, the two or three guys, the two conspirators who put this all together, John Kaplan and Kent Martin, aided and abetted in ways I have yet to be told by Kent Collins and, of course, by my young bride, Andre. I don't call you Andre very often, do I? Yeah. They managed to keep me totally in the dark about all this until a couple of weeks ago when, in a conference call, John and Kent called me to say, to let me know there was going to be something going on today, and I think they wanted to make sure I was going to be in town. Although after they called, I thought seriously of getting out of town. I've been very much, what's the word I want to use here? I don't want to say stressed. I will. I was stressed by, and a little upset at what this might turn out to be, and I'm happy to say that it's been overwhelming. I would like to say I'm going to be humble, but I know that one of them will then say, "And you deserve to be." I know they've been engaged in fundraising for a considerable time now. In fact, Thursday night, I have to confess, I opened up the Columbia Tribune and was really kind of overwhelmed when I saw the headline, "MU gets $10 million. And for just a moment I thought, oh, they've surpassed every imaginative. And not only that, I'm going to get a building named after me with a big tiger on the front. Well, that feeling, of course, didn't last terribly long. But again, I thank you all for coming, and I thank you guys very much. I very much appreciate it. And we got to get together and do this again sometime.